A black Bentley pulled up to the curb outside the Monarch Hotel, its polished surface reflecting the gray shimmer of an early fall afternoon in San Francisco. The city's familiar coastal fog curled lazily around Market Street, softening the edges of glass towers and streetcar wires. Inside the lobby, conversation dimmed, and the clink of china cups from the cafe paused as heads instinctively turned toward the arrival. The doorman, in a perfectly pressed navy coat and cap, stepped forward, pulling the door open with a flourish he reserved for the most important guests. Out stepped a woman whose very presence seemed to slow the moment. She was slender but poised, her posture as straight as the polished brass railings on the hotel's revolving doors. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was swept into an elegant chignon, and the soft cream wool of her Dior coat caught the light like fine porcelain. Two bellhops moved toward the car's trunk, lifting out sleek, modern luggage, followed by two weathered leather trunks that looked more suited to a museum exhibit than an overnight stay. Their corners were worn smooth, brass locks dulled by decades of use. The younger bellhop raised an eyebrow to his partner, a silent question that went unanswered. The woman inclined her head politely at the doorman, then spoke in clear, confident Mandarin. The doorman's smile froze. He hesitated, glancing toward the front desk, before offering a courteous nod and gesturing her inside. She walked with unhurried grace into the grand lobby, where the chandelier's crystal pendants swayed faintly above a mosaic floor polished to a mirror sheen. Behind the front desk, Robert Kane, the hotel manager, stood beside Rebecca from reception. Kane was a tall man in his early 50s, his suit as crisp as the starched napkins in the hotel restaurant, his smile carefully calibrated to convey warmth without familiarity. But as the woman approached and presented a small cream-colored card bearing her name in elegant script, Lillian Cheng, his brow furrowed almost imperceptibly. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Rebecca began, her tone bright. "May I have your reservation name, please?" She repeated the question slowly when the woman replied in Mandarin, as if volume might bridge the gap of understanding. Lillian opened a slim leather purse and produced a printed sheet, an email in Mandarin, its date in bold, today. Kane glanced at it briefly before saying, "It appears your booking is for tomorrow." His voice carried the kind of patient firmness one might use with a confused guest. At that moment, Clara Brooks, a housekeeper on her afternoon shift, passed through the lobby, pushing a supply cart toward the elevators. Clara was 29, her dark hair neatly pulled back, uniform pressed with care. She noticed the scene without slowing, the way Kane's tone, though polite, seemed to place the blame for the mix-up squarely on the guest, the faint lift of Rebecca's eyebrow toward a colleague, the way other guests, waiting to check in, observed with idle curiosity, a few whispering as they glanced at the trunks. Clara knew better than to linger. In a hotel like the Monarch, staff weren't meant to insert themselves into front desk matters, especially not with VIP guests. Still, she slowed just enough to see the woman's expression shift, her gaze firm but uncomprehending, her hands tightening around the strap of her purse. Kane gestured toward the lounge. "Please have a seat, and we'll arrange something for you as soon as possible." He spoke the words as though delivering a favor rather than correcting a mistake. Lillian remained standing, her eyes scanning the lobby before settling briefly on Clara, who quickly looked away. Then, as the bellhops moved past with the vintage trunks, something small slipped from Lillian's coat pocket and landed on the marble with the faintest sound. A glint of green, no bigger than a matchbox. No one seemed to notice, no one except Clara. Clara's cart slowed to a stop beside one of the marble columns. She glanced around. No one was looking. Leaning down, she picked up the object, a pendant carved from deep green jade, shaped into a phoenix with outstretched wings. It was cool to the touch, heavier than it looked, and the workmanship was exquisite, the kind of piece you'd expect to see in a glass case with a museum placard. For a moment, Clara's thumb traced the delicate curves of its wings. Whoever this woman was, she clearly wasn't just any guest. Clara slipped the pendant into her palm, intending to return it right away. But Lillian was now speaking rapidly to Kane, gesturing toward her luggage and the printed email. Kane's smile had thinned. He nodded mechanically, clearly understanding little of what was being said. Rebecca tapped at the computer keyboard, her polite tone fraying at the edges. "We'll have your room ready in an hour," she said slowly, each word spaced as if she were reading to a child. Lillian tilted her head, listening, but her eyes flickered with impatience. Clara pushed her cart toward the service hall, the pendant still in her hand. She knew the right thing was to step forward, return it, and be on her way. But she also knew Kane. Once he noticed her intervening, there'd be questions. Why was housekeeping inserting herself into guest relations? It was the kind of small step that could draw the wrong kind of attention. As she paused in the doorway to the staff corridor, Clara looked back. Lillian had taken a seat in the lounge, her posture impeccable, hands folded over her purse. Around her, the monarch's patrons carried on. Business travelers hunched over laptops, a pair of tourists snapping photos of the chandelier, a group of well-dressed women chatting over cappuccinos. Yet there was a thin space around Lillian, as if the air itself were holding her at a distance. From where Clara stood, she caught snippets of conversation from two guests seated nearby. "Probably her first trip out of the country," one woman said. "Wouldn't surprise me," the other replied. "They get rich so fast over there, don't even know how to use a proper fork." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She'd heard remarks like that before, little barbs hidden under the veil of casual conversation. Lillian didn't appear to react, but her gaze was fixed on the fog-draped view beyond the lobby windows, as if the voices didn't reach her. Clara's break was almost over. She tucked the pendant safely into the pocket of her uniform, telling herself she'd find the right moment to return it. Maybe when the lobby was quieter, when Kane wasn't hovering, when it wouldn't turn into a spectacle. Just then, a bellhop wheeled one of the vintage trunks toward the elevator. Its brass corner caught the light, and for a heartbeat, Clara imagined it not as luggage, but as a vault, holding something important, something that had made this woman cross an ocean, only to be met with polite walls. Clara started toward the service elevator, but her mind was already drifting ahead to the pendant in her pocket. She didn't know why, but it felt like the kind of object that could change the course of things, if only she had the courage to let it. The fog had thickened by the time Clara returned to her housekeeping cart on the 12th floor. Outside the tall windows at the end of the corridor, the streetlights glowed as pale orbs in the mist, their halos blurred like watercolor. The Monarch Hotel had a way of making time feel slower, thick carpet underfoot, the steady hum of distant elevators, muted voices behind closed doors. Clara set fresh towels in the storage closet, but her thoughts kept circling back to the jade phoenix in her pocket. Every so often, she would press her fingers against the fabric, feeling its solid weight, the way the carved wings curved upward. She wasn't the kind to pry into guests' lives. Still, something about this woman, Lillian Cheng, stood apart from the other high-paying visitors who swept through the Monarch. There had been no entourage, no translator, no publicist making demands. Just her, those vintage trunks, and a language no one seemed willing to understand. On her way to the next room, Clara passed the open door of the Magnolia Suite, where another housekeeper, Denise, was vacuuming. Denise looked up, pulling the cord from under the bed. "Hey, you hear about the VIP and the Bentley?" she asked over the noise. Clara kept her tone light. "Saw her in the lobby." Denise smirked. "Whole front desk's buzzing. Apparently she's some big deal from overseas, but nobody can figure out exactly what she wants. Kane's acting like she's a problem to be managed." That tracked. Kane didn't like uncertainty. It disrupted his image of seamless service. Clara just nodded and moved on. Half an hour later, she was restocking toiletries when her radio crackled. "Brooks, when you finish up, come to the tea lounge. Guest assistance." It was Rebecca from the front desk. Her voice was clipped, neutral. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and headed down. The lounge was dimmer now, the crystal chandeliers casting warm pools of light over dark wood tables. At a corner table by the window sat Lillian, the same posture as before, her teacup untouched. When she saw Clara approach, her gaze sharpened. Not cold, but deliberate. Clara stepped closer. "Ma'am, did you need something?" Lillian reached into her coat and produced a folded sheet of paper covered in Mandarin characters. She spoke quietly, her voice even, but the words tumbled out in a rhythm Clara knew well, though it had been years since she'd used it. Without thinking, she answered in Mandarin. "Would you like me to translate for you?" The shift in Lillian's expression was instant. Surprise first, then relief, then something deeper, a recognition. She nodded quickly, speaking again, and this time Clara caught every word. Her phone wasn't working, the hotel had her reservation wrong, and she needed documents from her luggage for a meeting the next morning. Clara reached into her apron pocket and drew out the jade pendant, placing it on the table. "I think you dropped this in the lobby." Lillian's hands trembled slightly as she picked it up. She didn't just thank Clara. She fastened the pendant around her neck immediately, her fingers lingering on it as if grounding herself. "This is more precious than you can imagine," she said in Mandarin. Clara took a breath. "Let me help you. I can talk to the front desk." They walked together toward the front desk, Lillian's steps measured but purposeful. Clara could feel curious eyes following them, staff pausing mid-task, guests glancing over their cocktails. It wasn't every day that a housekeeper escorted a guest with such quiet authority. Rebecca's mouth fell open slightly when she heard Clara speaking in fluent Mandarin, translating Lillian's request. "Her booking is correct," Clara explained, "and she needs access to her suite tonight. There's also a specific temperature setting she requires, due to a medical condition." From the corner of her eye, Clara saw Robert Kane emerge from his office. His gaze moved between them, calculating. "I wasn't aware we had Mandarin speakers on staff," he said evenly. "It wasn't in the job requirements," Clara replied, matching his tone. "But I lived in Beijing for 2 years. Kane studied her for a moment longer, then smiled, not warmly, but in that polished, managerial way that signaled a shift in tactics. "Well, that's fortunate. Since you've established a rapport with Ms. Cheng, you'll assist her directly during her stay." The decision was announced so smoothly that Clara barely registered the weight of it until she caught Denise peering from behind a potted palm, brows raised. Whispers would be flying through the staff corridors before the hour was over. By the time they reached the Magnolia Suite, Lillian's temporary quarters, Clara's curiosity was burning. She'd seen those vintage trunks up close now, each one meticulously locked. As Clara helped Lillian unpack, she caught glimpses of silk garments, porcelain wrapped in linen, and a leather folio worn at the edges. "These have been in my family for generations," Lillian said softly, almost to herself. "I brought them because they are pieces of what I'm seeking." "What are you looking for?" Clara asked. Lillian paused, meeting her eyes. "Something lost a long time ago, and I believe the answers are here, in this city." Clara didn't press further, but she could feel the current beneath those words, something important enough to carry across continents, through language barriers, and into the hands of someone no one in the lobby had thought to take seriously. As she left for the night, Clara realized her role at the Monarch had shifted in the span of an afternoon. She wasn't just turning down beds and replacing towels anymore. She had stepped into a story whose shape she didn't yet know, but whose edges were already beginning to gleam. 2 nights later, the Monarch Hotel was quieter than usual. Outside, a light rain blurred the streetlights along Post Street, while inside, the marble lobby glowed under chandeliers that threw warm light across the patterned floor. Most guests had retreated to their rooms or the lounge, leaving the corridors hushed except for the distant hum of the service elevator. Clara followed Lillian down one such hallway on the 3rd floor, their footsteps softened by the thick carpet. Earlier that evening, over jasmine tea, Lillian had unfolded her grandmother's old map of the hotel, though back then it wasn't called the Monarch. The hand-drawn floor plan showed an extra set of rooms in the East Wing that no longer appeared on modern blueprints. "My grandmother called it the Jade Pavilion Suite," Lillian explained. "She designed it herself, but after certain events, it was sealed away." Clara had felt a skeptical pang. Hidden rooms were the stuff of novels, but she kept it to herself. Now, under the muted glow of wall sconces, with rain pattering faintly against the tall windows, the idea felt less far-fetched. They stopped in front of an alcove displaying a large Ming-style vase painted with cobalt dragons. The proportions seemed slightly off, as if the alcove was shallower than it should be. Lillian ran her fingers over the porcelain surface until they paused on a small phoenix emblem worked into the glaze. "This," she said quietly, pressing the emblem. A soft click echoed. Clara blinked as the wood paneling at the back of the alcove shifted. Together, they pushed it inward, revealing a narrow corridor beyond. The air that drifted out was cooler, carrying a faint scent of cedar and something older, like the inside of a closed trunk. They stepped inside, pulling the panel closed behind them. Clara clicked on a flashlight, the beam catching dust motes drifting in the still air. At the end of the corridor was a heavy wooden door, its surface carved with swirling clouds and another phoenix emblem. Lillian reached up, unclasped the jade pendant from around her neck, and pressed it into a recessed shape on the door. There was a muted thud as the lock released. The door swung open onto a room that took Clara's breath away. The beam of Clara's flashlight swept across the room, revealing a space untouched by time. The Jade Pavilion Suite was an intricate blend of 1940s luxury and traditional Chinese artistry. Silk wall panels, their colors faded but still rich, depicted mist-covered mountains and winding rivers. Carved wooden screens divided the sitting area from a raised alcove that held a low tea table flanked by lacquered chairs. Porcelain vases stood in recessed niches, each painted with delicate scenes: cranes in flight, lotus blossoms opening under the moon. A long rug, its pattern of interlocking clouds worn soft, stretched across the polished hardwood floor. Even in the dust, Clara could feel the elegance of the room's design, like stepping into a secret preserved for someone who might never return. Lillian moved with reverence, her hand brushing the silk panels as though greeting old friends. On the far wall hung a large black-and-white photograph, a poised young woman in a tailored qipao standing beside a man in a Western suit. The resemblance to Lillian was unmistakable. "My grandmother," Lillian said, her voice low. "This was her sanctuary." She crossed to a writing desk tucked into a corner, its surface scattered with brittle papers, a fountain pen still resting in its holder as if awaiting her return. She lifted a sheet gently. "These are her business notes, orders for art pieces, meeting appointments." Her eyes scanned the Mandarin script before setting the page back exactly as it had been. Clara's attention was drawn to a portrait frame hanging slightly askew above the desk. She reached up to straighten it and heard a faint metallic sound. Behind the frame was a small wall safe, its door sealed with a tarnished brass dial. "Do you think?" Clara began. Lillian was already stepping closer. "If she hid something here, it would matter." She tried a sequence of numbers, murmuring in Mandarin: birth year, wedding year, the date the monarch opened, but the safe stayed shut. Finally, she tried one last combination. With a soft click, the handle turned. Inside lay a single envelope, yellowed with age, addressed in elegant English script to Mrs. Mei Lin Zhao at an address in Hong Kong. The postmark read 1951. Lillian slid the letter out carefully, unfolding its creased pages. Clara watched her eyes move quickly over the words, then narrow, then soften in something like grief. "It's from her business partner," Lillian murmured. An apology, and an admission that she was forced out by threats and lies. And this— She reached into the envelope again and withdrew a small matching pendant in the shape of a dragon. "The other half," Clara stared at it. The twin to the phoenix, together forming a pair. The room seemed to hold its breath with them. Lillian held the dragon pendant in her palm, her fingers closing around it as though afraid it might vanish if she let go. The jade glinted faintly in the beam of Clara's flashlight, its curves perfectly mirroring the phoenix she wore. My grandmother always said the phoenix and the dragon together symbolized balance and prosperity, she said softly. She must have left this here for someone to find, or perhaps she never had the chance to take it. Clara felt the air in the suite change, as if the walls themselves had leaned closer to listen. This letter, does it prove what happened to her? It's a start, Lillian replied. It's more than I had yesterday, but it also means... She trailed off, turning toward the photograph again. Someone went to the trouble of hiding this, which means someone else might have gone to the trouble of making sure it stayed hidden. They carefully returned the other objects in the safe, leaving the pendant and the letter with Lillian. She slipped them into the leather folio she carried and clasped it shut. We need to document everything here. Photographs, notes, anything that can't be moved without damaging it. As Clara adjusted her phone to take the first picture, the faintest sound reached them, a muted click, like a latch being tested. Both women froze. It came again, from somewhere beyond the panel they'd entered through. Lillian mouthed, "Someone's there." The light rain outside tapped steadily against the sealed windows, but in the narrow corridor beyond the hidden door, a shadow passed, slow, deliberate. Clara's pulse quickened. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't call out. They were just waiting. Lillian closed the folio and straightened, her voice calm but firm. "We can't be found here. Not yet." Clara nodded, switching off the flashlight. The two women stood in the dim glow of the hidden suite, listening to the quiet that felt anything but safe. The next morning, San Francisco woke under a pale, overcast sky. From the 12th floor of the Monarch, the city looked muted. Cable cars clanged in the distance, their bells faint under the hum of early traffic, and the rain from the night before had left the streets slick and shining. Clara arrived for her shift with the uneasy memory of that shadow outside the Jade Pavilion suite still fresh in her mind. Lillian had insisted they slip out quietly, waiting until the hallway was empty before sealing the panel behind them. No one had said a word in the elevator ride back up to the Magnolia Suite. Now, as Clara wheeled her cart past the lounge, she caught sight of Robert Kane speaking in low tones with two men she didn't recognize. They were sharply dressed but carried themselves like they belonged to no guest list, eyes scanning the room rather than admiring it. When Kane noticed her, his expression didn't change, but his conversation shifted. Whatever they were discussing, she wasn't meant to hear. She continued toward the service elevator, but the sense of being observed trailed after her. That feeling only deepened when she reached the 12th floor and found Lillian's suite door ajar. "Ms. Chang?" Clara knocked gently, then stepped inside. The sight stopped her cold. Drawers had been pulled out and emptied onto the carpet. Silk garments were tossed over chairs, papers scattered in drifts across the floor. One of the vintage trunks lay on its side, its brass lock bent. The folio, Lillian's folio, was open on the desk, its contents gone. From the bedroom, Lillian appeared, her face pale but composed. She was holding the jade phoenix in one hand, as if she'd pulled it from a hiding place. "They took the letter," she said quietly, "and the dragon pendant." Clara's stomach tightened. "Who?" Lillian's gaze went to the window, where the fog had thinned just enough to reveal a black SUV idling across the street. A figure sat inside, the outline indistinct behind tinted glass. "The same people who erased my grandmother," she murmured. Clara stepped further into the suite, careful not to tread on the scattered papers. She bent to gather a few, but Lillian shook her head. "Leave them where they are," she said. "We'll need to photograph the scene exactly as it is." The calm in Lillian's voice unsettled Clara almost as much as the break-in itself. "Shouldn't we call the police?" "They won't help," Lillian replied flatly. "Not when the people behind this can pick up the phone and make reports disappear. I've seen it before." Clara hesitated. "Then what do we do?" Lillian crossed to the desk, pulling open the one drawer left untouched. From inside, she retrieved a small flash drive wrapped in a silk scarf. "We make sure the evidence they didn't find stays out of their reach, and we find a way to make it public." Before Clara could answer, a knock sounded at the door, firm, official. They exchanged a glance, neither moving. "Miss Cheng?" Robert Kane's voice carried through the crack. "I'd like to speak with you about an incident last night." Lillian's expression sharpened. She stepped to the door but didn't open it. "Not now, Mr. Kane. I'm occupied." There was a pause. Then Kane's tone cooled. "I understand some items of yours may be missing. If you could describe them, we can better assist you." "You'll know them when you see them," Lillian replied, "assuming you're looking in the right places." Another pause. "Very well," Kane said at last. "We'll continue our internal review." When his footsteps receded, Clara exhaled. "He knows more than he's letting on." "They all do," Lillian said. She looked toward the window again, at the waiting SUV, "which means we have less time than I thought." She pressed the flash drive into Clara's hand. "Keep this somewhere safe. If they come after me again, you get it to someone who will listen." Clara felt the weight of it in her palm, small, but holding enough truth to put powerful people on edge. By late afternoon, the monarch's mood had shifted. The usual low murmur of guests and staff felt strained, brittle. Clara could sense it in the way conversation stopped when she entered a room, in the sidelong glances that followed her down the hall. She kept the flash drive in the inside pocket of her cardigan, her hand brushing against it every few minutes just to make sure it was still there. Lillian had stayed in her suite since morning, curtains drawn, phone off, speaking only when necessary. Near the end of Clara's shift, Denise caught her in the service corridor. "You should know," she whispered. "Security's been asking about you. Not just the usual check-in, real questions, like who you spend time with, where you go on your breaks." Clara's throat went dry. "Why?" Denise shrugged uneasily. "I don't know, but it's got Kane's fingerprints all over it. Be careful." When Clara returned to the Magnolia Suite, she found the door ajar again. She stepped inside, calling Lillian's name, but the suite was empty. On the desk lay a single sheet of paper in Lillian's handwriting. "If I don't come back by tonight, trust no one at the Monarch. Go to the place we talked about." The paper was weighed down by the Jade Phoenix pendant. From somewhere down the hall came the sound of an elevator bell, then the unmistakable tread of several sets of footsteps. Heavy, unhurried, getting closer. Clara's heart kicked hard against her ribs. Whoever was coming wasn't here for turn-down service. Cliffhanger. Clara has to decide in seconds whether to run, hide, or confront whoever is about to enter. Clara's mind snapped into motion. She slipped the Jade Phoenix into her pocket, the flash drive still secure in her cardigan, and glanced toward the service door at the back of the suite. The footsteps outside grew louder, measured, deliberate. She eased the service door open and stepped into the narrow hallway that connected to the staff elevator. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and metal polish, the usual backstage scent of the Monarch. She kept her pace steady. Rushing would draw attention if anyone was around the corner. When she reached the elevator, it was already on its way up. The digital display ticked from 3 to 4, each number climbing like a countdown. She pressed the call button and listened. No voices behind her yet, but the suite door had creaked open just before she slipped out. They'd find the note soon. The elevator doors opened to reveal an empty cab. She stepped inside, hit B for basement, and held her breath until the doors closed. As the elevator descended, she remembered Lillian's instruction. "If I don't come back, go to the place we talked about." That place was the Chinatown Historical Society, a quiet brick building tucked between a bakery and a herbal medicine shop on Stockton Street. Lillian had said they might be the only ones willing to help if things turned dangerous. When the elevator reached the basement, Clara exited into the dim storage area. Crates of glassware lined the walls, and the hum of refrigeration units masked her footsteps. She pushed through the heavy door to the loading dock, where delivery trucks idled in the cool afternoon air. A catering van driver in a black jacket was unloading trays. Clara approached, forcing her voice steady. "Going toward Chinatown?" He looked her over, then shrugged. "Close enough. Hop in the front, but make it quick." As they pulled away from the Monarch, Clara glanced back through the rain-speckled window. Two men in suits had stepped out onto the loading dock, scanning the alley. One of them held up a phone, his gaze following the van until it turned the corner. The Chinatown Historical Society was quiet, except for the steady ticking of an old wall clock. The brick building felt like another era. Polished wood floors, glass display cases filled with sepia photographs, and the faint scent of paper and tea leaves. Behind the front desk sat an older woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. She looked up from a stack of files as Clara entered, the bell above the door chiming softly. "You must be Clara," she said, her tone more statement than question. "I'm Amanda Chu. Ms. Cheng told me you might come." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Lillian's missing. Her suite was searched. The letter and the dragon pendant are gone. She told me to bring this to you." She pulled the flash drive from her cardigan, setting it gently on the counter. Amanda's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "Let's take this to the archive room." They walked down a narrow hallway into a room lined with filing cabinets and old maps. Amanda plugged the drive into a laptop, her fingers moving with surprising speed. "If this contains what I think it does," she murmured, "it's more than just a family dispute. It's a record of a pattern. Chinese-owned properties taken during the 1940s and 50s under the guise of legal transactions. The screen filled with scanned deeds, notarized letters, even audio recordings of business meetings." Clara leaned in, recognizing the letter from Lillian's grandmother's partner, but here it was accompanied by an affidavit verifying its authenticity. There were also documents tying the Monarch's current corporate owners to other suspicious acquisitions. Amanda glanced up. "If this goes public, they'll have no choice but to negotiate. But we'll need someone willing to put their name on the record. That means Ms. Cheng." Clara swallowed. "And if she's gone, then they win," Amanda said simply. Before Clara could reply, the front bell chimed again. Once, then again. Amanda's eyes flicked to the security monitor on the wall. On the black and white feed, Robert Kane stood in the lobby, flanked by the two suited men Clara had seen at the hotel. He looked straight into the camera. Amanda's gaze stayed on the monitor, her face unreadable. "They shouldn't know this place exists," she murmured. Clara's pulse quickened. "Then how—" "They're here for the drive," Amanda said, already closing the laptop and slipping it into a leather satchel. "We have one exit they don't know about. Follow me." The chime of the bell came again, louder this time, followed by the muffled sound of Kane's voice calling, "Ms. Chu, I believe you have something that belongs to the Monarch Hotel." Amanda didn't answer. She led Clara through a back hallway lined with old event posters and into a storage room that smelled faintly of incense. At the far wall, she pushed aside a tall shelving unit with a hidden hinge, revealing a narrow doorway to an outdoor stairwell. As they stepped out into the cool, damp air, Clara heard the front door of the Historical Society open, Kane's polished tone giving way to something harder. "Check the back," he ordered. Amanda set a brisk pace up the stairwell to a side street, her satchel clutched tight. "They'll expect us to head toward Grant Avenue," she said, "so we're going the other way." They cut through a small alley strung with red paper lanterns, the glow faint in the gray light. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly behind them, faster now. Amanda glanced over her shoulder. "We're not going to outrun them forever. We need to get this to someone who can protect it." Clara thought of the one person Kane wouldn't expect, the investigative reporter Lillian had mentioned but never met in person. "I know who," she said, "but we'll need a phone." Amanda nodded toward a payphone at the corner. "It's old, but it works." They were halfway there when a black SUV turned onto the street, its engine low and deliberate. Amanda's voice was calm but urgent. "Clara, run!" The SUV's tires hissed on the wet pavement as it rolled closer, its dark windows reflecting the faint red lantern light. Clara's feet hit the sidewalk hard, splashing through shallow puddles as she sprinted toward the payphone. She could hear Amanda behind her, the steady rhythm of her steps just a half-beat slower. The phone was an old rotary model encased in a scratched metal booth. Clara grabbed the receiver, her breath ragged, and dropped in 2/4, Amanda pressed into her palm. She dialed the number Lillian had made her memorize. Sarah Winters, the investigative reporter. The line rang twice before a crisp voice answered. "Winters!" "It's Clara from the Monarch, Lillian Cheng's friend," she gasped. "I have proof. Deeds, letters, recordings, everything. They know I have it." "Where are you?" Sarah's tone shifted instantly. "In Chinatown, near—" Clara glanced over her shoulder. The SUV had stopped mid-street. 2 men stepped out, scanning the sidewalks. "Near the Lantern Alley. We can't stay here." "Get to the Tribune building," Sarah instructed. "Service entrance. I'll meet you in the lobby with security." Clara hung up and turned to Amanda, who was already pulling her toward the cross street. "She'll meet us, but we have to move." They wove through the narrow lanes past closed bakeries and shuttered shops until they reached Columbus Avenue. From there, the neon sign of the Tribune's headquarters was just visible through the fog. Clara's legs burned, but she didn't slow. Behind them, the SUV had turned again, headlights cutting through the mist. Amanda's grip on the satchel tightened. "Once we get inside, they can't touch us without showing their hand." The Tribune's service entrance was a heavy glass door tucked beneath a faded awning. Clara pounded once, twice, before it swung open to reveal a tall woman in a gray coat, Sarah Winters herself. "In here," Sarah said briskly, pulling them inside. The lobby was quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Security guards at the desk watched them enter, their eyes flicking toward the street where the SUV idled, half hidden in the fog. Amanda handed Sarah the satchel. "Everything's on the drive. Originals, scans, notarized statements. It's enough to prove the Monarch's current owners inherited stolen property, and that the pattern wasn't limited to one hotel." Sarah's gaze was sharp, but there was a current of excitement in it, too. "If this is as solid as you're saying, it could be one of the biggest real estate fraud stories in the city's history." "It is," Clara said quietly. "And it cost people like Lillian's grandmother everything." Sarah nodded once. "We'll verify it fast, but I'll need Lillian on record." Clara's chest tightened. "She's missing. Taken from her suite, or she left before they could." Before Sarah could respond, one of the guards approached. "There's a man outside asking to come in. Says he's from the Monarch Hotel management." "Robert Kane," Sarah guessed. When the guard confirmed, she shook her head. "Tell him no comment, and call the police to report a possible intimidation attempt." Amanda arched an eyebrow. "Think they'll do anything?" "Not much," Sarah admitted. "But it'll go in the report. Every paper trail helps." She turned back to them. "Once this runs, they'll have to face it, publicly. It's too big to bury now." For the first time since the break-in, Clara felt a thin thread of relief. The evidence was safe. The story was in the right hands. But Lillian was still out there, somewhere between hunted and in hiding. 2 days later, the Tribune's front page carried the headline in bold black type: "Monarch Hotel built on stolen legacy, decades-old fraud exposed." The article detailed the property deeds, the forged transfers, and the pattern of targeting Chinese-owned businesses in mid-century San Francisco. Accompanying photos showed the hidden Jade Pavilion suite, the jade pendants side by side, and a portrait of a poised young woman in a qipao, Lillian's grandmother. By mid-morning, news crews and protesters lined the monarch's front steps. Signs reading, "Justice for Mei Lin" and "Stop Erasing History" bobbed in the crowd. Guests were rerouting their reservations. Investors were demanding explanations. Inside the lobby, Robert Kane stood stiff behind the reception desk, trying to maintain composure as cameras flashed. That composure cracked when the revolving door spun and Lillian Ching walked in. She wore a simple navy dress, hair pinned neatly, and in her hand was the leather folio, restored, intact. Clara followed a step behind, the jade phoenix around her neck. The murmur in the lobby swelled to a hush. Lillian crossed the marble floor with unhurried grace and stopped in front of Kane. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice carrying in the stillness, "you may want to inform the board that I'll be attending today's meeting, as a claimant." Kane's jaw tightened. "You're not—" "I am," she interrupted, pulling from the folio a certified court order. "Temporary injunction, asset freeze, until my family's ownership claim is resolved." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. The reporters surged forward, cameras flashing again. Clara caught Kane's expression, a mix of anger and calculation, but he said nothing. In that moment, silence was his only option. Lillian turned to the cameras. "This is not revenge. This is restoration. My grandmother's name and work will no longer be hidden, and this building will honor the truth." The board meeting that afternoon was short and decisive. Under the glare of public attention, 6 members voted in favor of recognizing Lillian's family's 25% ownership of the monarch. A settlement would follow, but more important to Lillian was the agreement to restore the Jade Pavilion Suite as a permanent heritage space, open for guests and the community to see. 2 weeks later, Clara stood beside Lillian in that restored suite. The dust was gone, the silk wall panels cleaned and lit with warm gallery lights. The portrait of Mei Lin Zhao now hung above the fireplace with a small bronze plaque beneath. Founder and visionary. Mei Lin Zhao, 1938 to 1951. Tourists moved quietly through the room, pausing at the display case where the phoenix and dragon pendants rested side by side. Clara watched an elderly couple linger there, the woman whispering something to her companion before wiping at her eyes. Lillian glanced over, smiling faintly. This is what she wanted, a bridge between cultures, a place where beauty and truth lived together. Clara nodded, touching the pendant at her own neck. "And it's here because you wouldn't give up." "Because we wouldn't," Lillian corrected. "You listened when no one else did." Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through the fog, sending a shaft of golden light through the suite's window. For a moment, it caught on the phoenix's jade wings, making them glow as if ready to take flight. Clara thought of how it had all started, with a simple act of returning something that had been dropped. She smiled, feeling the warmth of the room, the quiet dignity of justice done. Some truths, she realized, don't shout, they shine. In the quiet after the storm, the Monarch Hotel stood not just as a monument of stone and glass, but as a living testament to what happens when truth is finally given room to breathe. The gilded lobby lights glowed softer now, no longer hiding shadows, and the restored Jade Pavilion suite seemed to hold its own kind of sunlight. Guests lingered there, not out of idle curiosity, but with a respect that had been missing before. The heart of the story wasn't in the headlines or the legal victories. It was in the steady, unshakable dignity of a woman who refused to let her grandmother's name be erased, and in the quiet courage of another, once overlooked by her own workplace, who chose to listen when others turned away. That act of listening became the spark that led to restoration, not only of a name and a legacy, but of a deeper kind of justice. It reminded many in the Black community that our worth is not determined by the narrow lens of those who judge us, but by the truth we carry and the good we choose to do with it. The lesson is simple, though it asks much of us. Hold your ground with grace, stand for what is right without bitterness, And when the moment comes, let your actions speak in a way that builds rather than destroys. Justice, when born of patience and compassion, can transform more than just circumstances. It can change the character of a place and even heal wounds between people. In this way, the struggle of one family found echoes in the Black community's own long fight to be seen and heard, and offered a reminder that the smallest bridge, built from respect, can connect worlds that once seemed far apart. Like a lantern left in a window on a foggy night, a single, unassuming kindness can guide us through the darkest streets. And sometimes, the person holding that lantern will be the very one we've passed by without a second thought. That truth has been lived over and over, not just in grand courtrooms, but in church basements, corner cafes, and Black community gatherings where stories are handed down like heirlooms, reminding us that every voice matters, especially the ones we're too quick to dismiss. As the days passed, the Monarch became more than a hotel. It became a meeting place of memory and possibility. The tourists still came for the views, but many left with something else, a story about courage that outlasted wealth, about heritage that refused to be silenced. And for those who knew the fuller truth, the sight of the Jade Phoenix catching the afternoon light was more than decoration. It was a promise. Take a moment to think of the people you've met in your own life whose strength you almost missed, whose stories you didn't know until they surprised you. If this story touched your heart, perhaps you'll carry its warmth into your own circles, offering it to someone who needs to be reminded that they matter. In that sharing, the light grows and the bridges between us grow stronger.